Hello and welcome. Welcome. I'll give people a few minutes to come in. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's say, so I'm guessing, all right. All right, so good evening everyone who's watching. Welcome to Bridging the Gap, DEI Beyond Healthcare, Candid Conversation. I'm your host, Dr. Lindra, nurse executive, wellness entrepreneur, and founder of D.L. James Consulting and Premier Infusions in Wellness. Tonight, we're just talking about buzzwords. We're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yes, DEI is being very redefined. It's being redefined, reframed, and in some cases, even removed. And we've watched just companies quietly scaling back their DEI communities or commitments, I should say, from the removal of inclusive language or on institutional websites like the Smithsonian to 10,000 layoffs with the Health and Human Services, and corporations like Target and Walmart reporting significant financial losses, up to $10 billion after pushback related to DEI policies. And in contrast, you have brands like Costco continue to stand firm, right, in their inclusion work. So we ask, is the protesting working, right? And more importantly, what are we doing, right? What are we doing about it? And we know that diverse companies perform better. And ethnically diverse organizations are 35% more likely to outperform their competitors. And diverse teams are 87% better at making decisions and inclusive workplaces. And they see about 2 to 2.5% more cash flow for their employees. So why the rollbacks? And tonight we have 3 powerhouse speakers from our upcoming Health and Wealth Expo Live Summit taking place on May 15th and 16th. And we're going to dive into what DEI looks like beyond the hospital walls, and in entrepreneurship, in publishing, and in faith-based leadership, and what we're doing candidly. So welcome. If we all just want to take a moment and just introduce yourselves, and I'll start with you, Pastor Quick, if you just wanted to do a brief introduction for yourself, and then Danielle, and then Justin.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm humbled and honored to be a part of this August group. My name is the Reverend Dr. Dante Quick. I am the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens here in Somerset, New Jersey. And we are about 6,000 members, and we are engaged in the deep liberative work of uplifting communities in several different areas.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, y'all. I am Dr. Danielle McCamey. I'm the founder, CEO, and president of DNPs of Color. We are a international nursing nonprofit that focuses on nursing workforce diversity, professional development, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation.
And happy Friday, everybody. My name is Justin Grant. I'm the author of the new book, Company Men, a Wellness Guide for Black men in corporate America. I'm also a longtime Wall Street executive, and I'm just thrilled to be here with y'all tonight.
Thank you. All right, thank you for those introductions. Well, let's start with this DEI. Right, it has often been reduced to window dressing. Right, mission statement without metrics, such a buzzword. And DEI initiatives, they often face resistance, with critics calling them performative. And how can how do you think organizations can move from surface level commitments to create lasting, measurable change in workplace culture and leadership? And I'll start with, I'm sorry, and I'll start with, you know what, Danielle, I'll start with you, Dr. McCamey.
Yeah, so the evolution of DEI and then the things that we're seeing today make it a very interesting discussion and having to pivot with different strategies. So I know with the work that we're doing within DMPs of color, we're being strategic and focusing on fortifying the community specifically, the nurses of color, to ensure that they're equipped to feel confident and competent to be able to navigate today's time. And then also that they feel that they have a community that can support them, because right now everything is on fire. And so having a strong network of community that can be supportive and resourceful, because within DMPs of color, we are highly educated with doctorate degrees, and that affords us access to certain power and certain networks. And so we've been really focusing in on coming up with strategies to ensure that we're able to leverage the network to navigate the certain spaces. So for me, it's fortifying these spaces where there are diverse communities to be supportive and transformative where they are.
Justin, how about you?
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, when we talk about DEI, we're looking at, the Fortune 500 companies. DEI always has to, if it's going to be effective, it has to be connected to the underlying business that's going to, drive that value for the shareholder, and that's going to drive that value, for the company ultimately. And on a hopeful note, despite the pendulum swing that we've seen in the past few months, the thing that gives me hope is that, we're going to be a majority minority country by 2045. And, I've done a lot of work focused on Black communities. And when I look at the Black and the Hispanic Latino community combined, they represent $4.6 trillion in consumer spending. And no company in their right mind wants to go out of their way to alienate these populations. There's too much money at stake, right? It doesn't make any sense to alienate folks that are going to buy your goods and services. And in order to capture those dollars, you have to have leadership teams that understand that value. And you have to have teams, in your frontline sales force that know how to speak to these communities, that are from these communities in many respects. But here's the kicker. You cannot retain that talent unless you go out of your way as a company to create an inclusive culture. And, I think the best companies are those companies that have a keen understanding of, who are the underrepresented people in their company. And they create a level of psychological safety, not just being good for goodness sake, but because it makes business sense. People are not going to do their best work if they don't feel psychologically safe. And so I know there are some legal challenges. Once we saw the overturning of affirmative action, we kind of knew that a lot of this stuff was coming down the pipeline. And, we got the pendulum swing in the last presidential election cycle. But the thing that we also have to remember is these things move back and forth. The pendulum swings. There's progress, and then there's backlash, and then there's more progress. And it's important for folks to just keep their eyes on that North Star goal and not lose hope, because it's darkest before, dawn, right? So let's not lose hope right now.
I can so appreciate how you said just not lose hope, and how the pendulum just swings back and forth, and it really does. And I love to hear your intake on that, Pastor Greg.
Well, I appreciate what Brother Grant just said, and one of the things that popped out in what I heard him say is no company in their right mind. And I think one of the things that make it difficult for organizations to operate in healthy fashions is unexamined white supremacy and how that distorts the view of what it means to be productive and operate in healthy corporate cultural ways. I think we see many examples of that, not just Target, which is overtly happening, but many companies have openly said they're scrubbing their DEI programs, right? And part of this is because the issue for me is not the D or the I. The issue I think at stake is the E, equity. And so companies have always craved and needed, as has been said, our diversity. They've always needed our inclusion. And so we'll sprinkle on marketing staffs, people of color, so they can help us access the capital in Black and Brown communities. But we won't make them senior vice presidents of marketing, right? And so not only do I think we have a safety issue, but we have an equity issue. We have a power issue. And these cycles reflect that over and over again. I often begin by saying, in my unique field, when I talk in corporate spaces, people wonder, why does a minister talk in these corporate spaces? Well, actually, the Black church was the first space of DEI in America, right? And you have to go back to February of 1865, where the famous 40 acres and a mule conversation was held. That really wasn't simply about land. It was about equity and how we acquire equity and bring inclusion in the space. And one of the things that we don't often think about in that famous Field Order 15 is that they weren't just given the land. The Field Order created opportunities for them to work it and buy it after, I think, a 3-year lease, right? And so I think part of what we have to reckon with within this conversation, and part of what the struggle can bring out of it, is us really grappling with the idea of inclusion, and that race is not about color. It's about economic power. And the only reason that Black and Brown people exist in this nation as we do is because we were necessary for the economic engines. So the last thing I'll say is we have to be really careful about how AI begins to play a role in this. That when your labor is no longer needed in the same way, it emboldens sort of the racial conversation. And I think there is a link here between the tech bros leading this anti-DEI charge and the sense that Black and Brown labor may not be needed in the same way in certain spaces. And so I think we've got to connect the dots between race and economics and how some of us are expendable. And even if we're in place, we're not giving spaces of power.
And I think that point is critically important to really focusing in on, like, having that power. And so that's kind of where we're focusing in on, that a lot of folks in our community have titles. So we're really having folks think about how to leverage the title and then ultimately leverage some of the power while we are still seated at some of these tables. But I couldn't agree with you more, Reverend Quick.
Absolutely. I mean, it becomes a point where, well, not a point. We're past that point. DEI has been so, the term has been weaponized to the point where people don't even want to say the word, and it's concerning when I hear about, being a nurse, or certain nursing organizations can't, have that on their poster board, something that's representing a diverse nationwide community. I mean, not even international. Nurses are everywhere, right? Nurses are everywhere, whether it's national or international. Not to be able to represent something that stands for equity or inclusion is disheartening, and it's almost sickening, right? And I think that's why conversations like these are crucial, because people need to know that it's okay to be at the table and say what's on your mind, because otherwise, right now, we're watching things unfold and we're watching history basically become erased. And if we continue to just be quiet, then we're part of the problem and we're not really a part of the solution. And DEI, it doesn't show up the same way everywhere. In healthcare, it might be about who gets access. In publishing, it might be about who tells the story, right? In faith communities, it's who's heard in the room. And when you talk about intersectionality in action, what are some real world examples of how systemic barriers manifest across industries, and what strategies have you seen successfully dismantle them? And I'll start with you, Pastor Quick.
Well, that's an intense question. My belief is that the tip of the new civil rights economic spear has to be Black mental health. Because I think even when we look at the healthcare industry, we are engaging the largest healthcare system here in the state of New Jersey. We've met with the CEO and a number of our educational institutions. As an economic model, we recognize that the way healthcare is administered to Black and Brown communities is hurting hospitals. Emergency rooms are inundated with mental health cases. And the way we eat our feelings, we eat our stress. We are in food deserts or healthy food deserts. So there are all these structural things. We know educational goals are connected to food goals, that young people who don't eat well don't learn well. So the structures around food, mental health are really deep and abiding barriers. And one of the things we're talking to hospitals about, our hospital system about, is as an economic model, you'll save a lot of money if you do preemptive mental health treatment. You'll save money on the front end. We won't crowd your emergency rooms. And so that got everybody's ear, right? Because for them, it's often not caring about the Black body, but about what that body represents in a green way. And so these structures are in place to keep us hungry, to keep us sick, to keep us mentally unengaged. And the things that we are trying to do is sound the alarm. You could give me $1 million, but if my mind ain't right, I'm gonna be broke in 6 months. How do we help each other become healthy individuals psychologically so that we can manage the other issues? And so at First Baptist, we're putting a number of resources, both personnel and community, into helping our communities recognize that they have a right to peaceful, holistic, healthy ways of living, and to identify the structures, whether it is embedded in our music, which is becoming more and more nihilistic, in our television, right? The most viewed shows we watch are housewives shows in which Black women are pitted against each other. And so there's all these subliminal things that are challenging us. And the last thing I'll say about this is we can see this now in college outcomes for Black men. Recent reports are showing that young Black men are no longer attending college in large numbers. So that Howard University, 19% of its students are Black men. That's the same amount of non-Black students that attend Howard. And therefore, the overwhelming number of students at Howard University are Black women. Why aren't Black men going to college? And what does that show going down the line, the prison industrial complex? All of those things are rooted in structures that are at the base of what we call communities: food, mental health, education. And we have to connect those dots in order to overcome it.
Justin, you want to piggyback off of that?
Yeah, I appreciate Pastor calling out the fact that Black men are not going to college in the same numbers. And I actually appreciate, its connection to our discussion about disparities in the healthcare system. I'm looking at it from the lens of even Black men who are at the higher end of the socioeconomic ladder. We're not going to the doctor. And we have the second lowest life expectancy of any demographic in this country. And as Black men, the only people who live shorter lives than us as Black men are our brothers from the Alaska Native/Native American population. And, when I look at us not going to the doctor, that is the product of historical mistrust in the Black community of the medical establishment. And I think it's incumbent on healthcare companies to figure out creative ways to engage this population, because we have to turn that piece around. I think it's also incumbent on us as folks in the Black community to understand what the opportunity is in medicine. There's actually a shortage of doctors right now. There is a shortage of medical specialists, and so there's a real opportunity for our young people to get an inroads into this industry. I have my almost 14-year-old daughter. She is dead set on becoming a doctor. And so I'm trying to do everything I can to empower this young lady and, make sure we're getting the resources in front of her to help her nurture that dream. But I think it's important for us to also get strategic as a community. We understand that Black men in particular, we are sicker than our white peers. We're dying earlier than they are. We're less likely to know what our blood pressure is. We're less likely to know what our cholesterol is. And I believe a lot of these problems are fixable. And, solving them requires us to, take some initiative. But then I also think that it's a two-way street, and the medical establishment, it's time for them to step up.
Okay, all right. Well, Dr. McCamey, I'll let you take it from there.
I think it's interesting perspectives that you all bring about, and yes, we are at a critical junction in that there are shortages across all health professions, and so and I think that's why conversations like this are critically important to challenge what's going on in our communities, what's going on in our societies, but also amplify the work that we are doing through writing, through community building, through professional organizations. And I think the times that we're in right now really calls for all sectors to collaborate and really support each other. And like I opened up in the beginning, like I am laser focused on finding ways to fortify our spaces so that we can, because we have an understanding of what the community needs are. And I feel like it's our responsibility to be the ones that we're looking for, especially during times that we're experiencing right now. And totally agree that, really banding together to push through these times, because as you mentioned, Dr. Lindra, in the beginning, like the things that we relied on through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion are being weaponized. So we have to strategize and do something different so that we can continue to move forward with progress together.
Do you want to talk about how what you're doing to move forward with progress with nurse shift change?
Yeah, so we got a lot of things going on. Dr. Lindra and I are working on two movements. One movement is the professional organizations for nurses of color. And so far, we've rallied almost 20 nursing organizations to mobilize for, right now, we're mobilizing behind joint statements to speak out externally together on some of these issues that we're experiencing that directly impact the nursing profession, the health of communities, and how some of these shift changes within the elimination or the attempt to eliminate diversity, equity, inclusion. And more recently, the restructuring of NIH and NINR, which are basically the epicenter of research. And research is the primary foundation to how we collect evidence that informs our practice on how we take care of people. So we've been mobilizing to get our groups together to start engaging through advocacy and our collective voices because our membership is looking for us to do that. And now's the time to push the needle. The second movement that we're working on is called Nurses Shift Change. And this is a movement that organically came together where we all were frustrated by either the lack of professional organizations saying anything or the perception of the lack of involvement of the nursing profession during today's time, as we're seeing everything being slashed in the stroke of a pen. And then us being nurses, we're at the crux of the bedside where we are actively seeing the downward stream impacts of these eliminations, from Medicaid, Medicare to decreasing funding for research that helps inform how we practice. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, we all are aware of all the things, but with the Nurse Shift Change movement, we really wanted to bring together nurses, healthcare professionals, and allies under the guise of really focusing on social justice, humanity, and ethics. So we are organizing a report to duty rally where we are calling on all nurses, healthcare professionals, allies to really stand up for our communities, stand up for equitable healthcare, and we're we're building the plane as we fly it, but we're catching a lot of energy of interest for folks that want to really collaborate and get together to rally so that we can amplify our voices to continue to push forward the needle and let people know that we're watching. We're not going to stand by idly while things continue to crumble, but and then also just being inspired by Senator Booker's 25 hour plus speech and how we have to get on the right side of history. Like, we cannot stand idly by. So we out here in these streets, May 24th. Come join us.
Yes, we are. And you know, I appreciate everything you just said, and it takes these type of movements so that there can be an understanding that, you know, because perception is reality. And I would say, and I said this all the time when I would speak to my staff, or, you know, whether it was a patient complaint and we always look at patient experience, right? And I would always say, well, patient's perception is reality. And I think that's something that goes a long way, right? Not just in the hospital, outside of the hospital, in our personal lives. If we don't see it happening, we don't realize things are taking place. And so thank you. I say that to say thank you for sharing the movements and what we are doing, because we want people to know what we're doing. And I think it's important. And that's why it's important, again, to have these type of conversations and to keep all of the relevancy going, right? And, you know, as corporate DEI support starts to shrink, entrepreneurship becomes more than a dream, and it becomes a survival tool. But let's be real. Access to capital, mentorship, and like opportunities, they're not equal. And so I guess our final question tonight is, what innovative strategies or support systems have you seen effectively empower underrepresented entrepreneurs to overcome, or healthcare professionals to overcome systemic challenges and succeed in their ventures? And I'll start with, and Pastor Quick, I'll start with you because I was saying how you're a huge advocate in entrepreneurship. So I'll start with you.
Well, I have a great deal of appreciation for all of you on this line. Coming from the context that I'm in, I recognize that we need safe spaces to have these strategy conversations. And quite often, the safest space we've ever had is the African American religious institution or the Black church. We are using our platform to help empower local entrepreneurs through um, in-house mentoring. Much of what's going on, as you said, is not just access to capital, but I think the first major issue is access to information and good vision casting and mentorship. And so, within the institutions that we own and operate, coordinating those and giving people access on a ladder basis, right? All of us start at different steps. At First Baptist, we're in the middle of right now using our 100 plus entrepreneurs to start our own internal mentorship programs. We want to start high school students in mentorship, returning college students. And as we begin to develop businesses that are very successful, we have some of the top Black businesses in our church, Black businesses in our communities. They go to our churches. How do we tap into them? How do we begin to feed back one into the other is part of the focus that we have. I think another structural problem, however, is vision. And this is almost as important as capital. I mean, I would argue that when we look at the history of Black people, we built more with less, that we were able to build communities and sustain communities when we weren't getting government funding. So when we look at Tulsa and cities in Florida, cities that became so successful that they had to be burned down and destroyed, within our DNA is not just surviving, but thriving. And by allowing each other to understand that we are capable, but we have to cast a vision. And what I mean by this is there's a difference. What I learned when I got to the campus of Princeton um, is my white counterparts weren't going to college to get a job. They were going to take over a business or start a business. Many of us students of color were coming because we wanted to go get a job. There's a difference in mindset. And I think if we can help challenge the mindset, and I think this point in history is an extreme point of opportunity. As the markets crash, as businesses begin to cut back, this is the time for us to cast vision and start businesses. The third thing I'll say is Black people have one of the largest economies in the world. In the world. If we could start getting communities to spend dollars within our communities, um, down the street from First Baptist is a largely Latino community. It's a 4-block area. That dollar spreads in that 4-block area at least 15 to 20 times through their own grocery stores and laundromats and hair and this and that and the other. In Black communities, we know our dollar escapes our community. We spend it other places. And so now is a time for us to use what looks like opposition as opportunity and to begin to put down foundations. And so in the next couple of months, we're going to be hosting business plans workshops. We're going to be bringing in people who help write grant applications and help to develop applications for funding from banks. Even though they may not be as plentiful, the knowledge is important. And to identify institutions within our communities that we can invest in and grow and can invest in us as we begin to grow.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I will, Justin, I'll go to you. What was your thoughts on?
Yep. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. I know Pastor Quick just did a great job. It really summing it all up. So we're just really talking about what innovative strategies or support systems have you seen effectively empower underrepresented entrepreneurs to overcome systemic challenges and be able to succeed in their ventures.
I think that is a challenging space. And one of the first things that comes to my mind with that question is the Fearless Fund. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the Fearless Fund, but it's now defunct. Federal court shut it down, said you can't have a race-based or gender-based grant program for Black women entrepreneurs. And so I definitely think that was part of the turning of the tide against DEI. And they were doing some impactful work. The grants for these women weren't even all that big, but it still got shut down, and that's unfortunate. When we talk about entrepreneurship, I have seen up close and personal, just in my own life. My wife, she went to business school. She came to me about 8 years ago, and she said, "Hey, Jay, I have got to get out of this corporate job. I am tired of trying to find a seat at the table, and so I'm going to build my own table." And she went to Rutgers Business School, and she studied how to run a business. She went there not to learn how to get a job and go work for somebody. And I'm not denigrating that either, because entrepreneurship is not for everybody. And but she managed to build a company, and now here we are 8 years later, and she has built a really strong business. She's paying people really good money. They have 401k plans, and I'm just super proud of her. And I've seen up close and personal how when somebody has a vision to start a business, how they can create jobs, and those jobs can impact the lives of other people. So I definitely want to see more of us, people of color, people from marginalized backgrounds, thinking like entrepreneurs. And even if you have a job, being entrepreneurial within your job, or being entrepreneurial about your career, and feeling empowered. Now, as for resources for folks, there are programs at banks. There are programs at CDFIs. Those are community development financial institutions. Many of these are Black-owned banks. Many of these are Black-owned banks who receive investment and funding from the federal government. Some of that has actually been on the chopping block because of DOGE, so hopefully it gets preserved. But other banks invest in CDFIs as well. And so I think, for folks that are interested in tapping into those resources, take a look at Black-owned banks. And I'm thinking about Carver. I'm thinking about Liberty. And there's a few others. And, folks are interested. I'm happy to pull together a list after the show and send those through. But definitely there is a concerted effort among CDFIs, those community development financial institutions, to help underrepresented entrepreneurs. Not necessarily, in all cases, get access to capital, but it might just be insights and mentoring and coaching on capital readiness. I know for a fact that there are banks out there that mentor, underrepresented entrepreneurs as well, and get them ready to scale. And then there's a few other programs. I'm thinking about Black Ambition, started by Pharrell. There's a venture fund called Collab Capital, and they're focused on building sustainable Black-owned businesses. There's Founders First, Hello Alice, Backstage Capital, just to name a few. So the resources are out there. You just got to do the search, and you just got to have that vision. And, the best time for that is right now.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more when you said the best time for that is right now. And it really hit home when you talked about your wife, right? Saying like, I can't try to make a room at the table for me anymore. And I'm sure Dr. McCamey can understand where I'm going with this. So for me, and just to share a personal story about me, you do all of the things. You do all of the things that you're told you're supposed to do, right? You get all of the education, you get all of the certifications, right? I achieved my doctoral nursing practice degree, and you still feel that you have to, there's still a feeling, right, that you don't belong in the room, even though you may be the most educated out of everyone in the room. So why is that, right? And I'm sure, Dr. McCamey can tell you this is one of the reasons why she started DMPs of Color, right? But I say that to say, so for me, not realizing my worth and realizing what I bring is why I became an entrepreneur. It's why I, started my own business. I mean, I started my own business initially as, it was more self-care for me, more advocacy for me being able to provide that community-based care my way, right? Not, making somebody else rich. And it has just evolved into so many other things. And so I can appreciate you mentioning your wife. And like you said, it's not for everyone, right? And these are the type of topics that we're going to be talking about at the expo. And that's why it's so important to get into rooms like the summit, to have these type of conversations, to get these diverse perspectives so that you can get that education and that mentorship. Because in nursing, I actually never had mentorship until I got into the business world. And I had a mentor who provided me business coaching. As a nurse, I never had a mentor, right? It was just not an option. Like I see other nurses being taken under the wings of other, nurse leaders, but I didn't have that option. So a lot of the work I had to do, I did it on my own. And I listen, it is just the way, the hand that I was dealt, and I don't feel any way about it, but it made me who I am. So it made me the CEO of 2 companies, right? It made me the founder of HW Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization. It made me, a part of DMPs of Color, and look at the movements that we're doing now with the Health and Wealth Expo and with the Nurse Shift Change movement. So I definitely can appreciate that perspective of entrepreneurship. And, Dr. McCamey, I'll let you, just really piggyback off of that.
I don't have anything else to add. Like y'all already talked about the game secrets, which are, having access to the information, which means having the access to the network, to the people that have the information. And then the mentorship. I mean, that's literally the key to success in any endeavor. And again, I sound like a broken record. That's the strategy with DMPs of Color, is to really fortify that space so that we have a strong network to get access to the information, that we offer mentorship so that folks that might not have the tools or the confidence or how to put things together, there's access to mentors that can help them put together all those pieces so that they can be self-sufficient. And there's no greater power than being self-sufficient.
Yep. And I just wanted to add one more thing. There are a wave of businesses that are owned by folks from the baby boomer generation, and they're looking to retire and cash out. And there are a whole slew of, Black corporate talent that might be a little burned out from corporate America, and they've learned all of the, operational disciplines and professionalism that come from corporate, because, there's some blessings to corporate. You can learn a lot. And, I think another thing for folks to think about is maybe if you don't want to necessarily bootstrap a business and build one from scratch, business acquisition, is another area of opportunity.
I love that. I love that. And you that's a great point. I don't think we think about that. I love that. And these are some of the things that, again, we're going to be talking about at the Health and Wealth Expo. How to take your expertise. Like you said, corporate it can be great because you can learn a lot. So now you have this expertise, you have all the training, right? And let's just use, I'm a nurse, so let's just use nursing, for example. You have the training, you have the degree, and as a nurse, you have certifications, right? Then you have the preceptorship that you receive, right? And now you have the years of the bedside training, or that, that leadership training that you get, whatever that looks like. you now have those skills that you can transition into a business, whether it be medical writing, whether it be, and you don't have to be a nurse or healthcare professional to be a medical writer. So whether it be starting a mental health practice as a nurse practitioner, right? And these are the type of things we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about how to not only start the business, but to also run the business efficiently and be able to provide that mentorship that you may not have. So that's why, and I appreciate that. And, you know, one last point that I do want to make when we talk about statistics, diverse executive boards report 53% higher returns on equity. And so investing in diverse entrepreneurship, it isn't just right, it's smart. And it's unfortunate that the world that we're living in right now isn't really taking that into consideration. So we have to be the ones to really not only empower ourselves, but empower our communities through leadership. So I thank all of you for your leadership. I thank you for joining me at the Health and Wealth Expo. I thank you for joining me this evening. Is there any last remarks that you'd like to make, any of you, before we close out?
I just have one. Let's just keep the faith, right? There's a lot of reasons right now to feel down. But what I'll say is this: just don't look at your 401k. Don't look at your IRA. Just, keep your eyes on the prize, right? And let's just keep the faith. Everything's going to be all right. The sun's still going to come up tomorrow.
I can so appreciate you saying that, because there's so much fear right now, and we have to remember and keep in mind that it's distractions. It's distraction. I've said this again and again. I say this on the podcast. It's distractions, and so we can't let fear take control of what we do. And so tonight, it isn't just about challenges. It's about what we do next. And if we know DEI works, and we know cutting it leads to decline, then the question becomes, how do we mobilize our communities? How do we leverage our dollars and, protect the future that we're building? So I'll leave that as a rhetorical question. And if you want to hear more from this wonderful, wonderful panel, make sure that you join us on May 15th and 16th. And again, thank you guys so much for joining. This has been wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So I thank you so much for joining.